Hi, I'm Mark from eReplacementParts.com. In this video series, we're going to show you how to remove, disassemble, and reassemble the transmission on a Troy-Bilt small frame tiller. The small frame transmission is used on Troy-Bilt's Bronco, Super Bronco, Proline, and Tuffy tillers. We won't concentrate on specific failures within the transmission, but instead give an overview of what it takes to disassemble the transmission into pieces and then properly reassemble it. Our videos apply to tillers manufactured from 2008 to the present. These tillers will have ball bearings on the wheel and tine shafts. There are a few production changes that were made to these tillers, and we will try to point them out as we go. There are 4 parts in our video series. Part 1 covers removing the transmission from the tiller. In Part 2, we will disassemble the transmission. Part 3 covers reassembling the transmission. And in Part 4, we will put the transmission back into the tiller. Our first task is to remove the transmission from the rest of the tiller. And we'll start by removing the rear tine guard. To do that, we need to remove the grip from the depth bar. The grip is simply pressed onto the depth bar. This can be kind of a challenge to remove, but it's just a matter of kind of wiggling it back and forth until it comes free of the depth bar. Next, I'll remove the 2 bolts at the rear of the tine guard. Next, I'll remove the 4 nuts and bolts on the front of the tine guard, as well as a support bracket on the bottom. Okay, the tine shield is now free, and I can lift it away from the tiller. There are a number of assemblies we'll be removing from the tiller during this repair. It's a good idea to keep your hardware separate so it'll be easier to put everything back together when it's time. So to do that, I'm just going to take some small parts bags and label them as to the assembly that I'm working on. And then I'll place the parts into that bag. Next, we'll remove the drag bar assembly from the transmission. First, I'll remove the drag bar where it attaches to the front of the tiller. And now I'll remove the rest of the drag bar assembly from the rear of the transmission. You'll notice that the assembly is attached to the transmission with a couple of bolts. There's also a 3rd bolt on the bottom of the transmission. You want to make sure you don't take that bolt out yet, or you're going to have all of your gear oil leak out of your transmission. Now we'll turn our attention to the front of the tiller. We need to get access to the belts and pulleys. To do that, we'll remove both the upper belt guard and the lower belt guard. There are 2 bolts securing the upper belt guard. Now we'll remove the lower belt guard. It's secured with 4 bolts. You'll notice that the clearance between the wheel and the belt guard is a little tight, so to make this easier, I'm going to remove the pin that holds the wheel in place on the axle, and then just pull the wheel out on the axle a little ways. Don't want to remove it completely, I just want to give me a little more room in here to work. And now I can remove those bolts. Next, we need to remove the belts as well as the drive pulley from the transmission. To do that, we'll start by loosening this upper idler pulley so we can remove the belt from its guard. Now I'll pull the forward drive belt off of the motor pulley. Now I'll remove the drive pulley from the transmission. There's a couple of flats on the back side of the drive pulley. I'll put a wrench on those to keep the transmission shaft from spinning, and then my ratchet wrench on the nut securing the drive pulley on the front. And now I can just remove it. Now I need to remove the forward drive belt idler pulley and its bracket. Before we can do that though, we need to remove the cable and the tension spring. I'll start with the tension spring. The tension spring just simply loops through a hole on the frame. An easy way to remove this type of string is to just wrap a rope around the post on the spring, and then I can pull on the rope to remove the spring. Like that. Next, I'm going to loosen this bolt that secures the pulley on our drive cable. Again, I don't need to remove this, I just need to loosen it. And that'll give me enough clearance to pull the cable away from the pulley. Just a little bit more. Now remove the bolt and flange that attaches the forward drive belt idler bracket to the transmission. Now we're ready to remove the engine, frame, and handle assembly from the transmission. If there's somebody around to help you with this part, it will make it a lot easier. The frame is attached to the transmission with 4 bolts. To start, I'm going to loosen the front 2 bolts, not remove them, and then go ahead and remove the rear 2 bolts. Now as I remove this last bolt on the rear of the transmission, it'll allow me to pivot the motor and frame assembly down on those front 2 bolts that we just loosened. Now I'll finish removing the front 2 transmission bolts and lift the engine, frame, and handle assembly away from the transmission. Now I'll remove the tines from the transmission tine shaft. They're just held in place with their shear bolts. And we'll finish up the transmission removal by just removing the wheels from the drive axle. These have been loose since we removed the lower belt guard. Now that we have the transmission removed, we can move on to disassembling it, and that's what we'll cover in part 2 of this video series. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or ask us a question.